Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today, we'll examine the president's claims of election fraud and what you need to know about the security of Wisconsin's election system.
Our elections, as you know, are radically decentralized. In Wisconsin, 1,800 plus municipalities run their election. To steal a national election, you need accomplices everywhere.
Then we'll meet Lake Michigan's new Coast Guard commander.
We actually are the third busiest sector in the Coast Guard, which is pretty astounding when you think of places like San Francisco and Miami, and we're doing that all in 100 days.
Plus, we'll learn about the FBI headquarters in Milwaukee. All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. President Trump continues to tout a lie that he won the 2020 election, despite evidence that confirms that Joe Biden won. While Trump continues to focus on what happened in 2020, these claims about election integrity matter in a midterm election year, when voters are counting on the voting system to be safe and secure. Edgar Lynn is with Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan anti-authoritarian group that uses litigation, advocacy, and research to protect elections. He says one thing that's different about Trump's election lies in 2026 is they're backed by the federal government. Lynn joins WUWM's Maayan Silver to break down the claims coming from the president and the facts about our election system this midterm election year.
Your executive override report summarizes basically the Trump administration's subversion efforts in 2022 and 2024 and has described them as deceive, disrupt, and deny. Before we get into each of the individual components, what does it mean overall?
Okay, so this is a three-part playbook. Deceive is manufacturing a fraud problem that isn't there, right? The non-citizen voting narrative, the inflated bad voter roll claims, but then using the machinery of the government to make disinformation look like actual evidence. So that's the deceive section. The next section is disrupt, using that manufactured doubt in the deceive prong as the pretext to make voting harder or seize control of election data and machinery. The voter roll lawsuits, the push for the SAVE Act, the pressure on election officials, right? Those all fit into the disrupt prong. And finally, the third one is deny. If the favored candidate loses anyway, they use everything that was built in the first two stages to contest, delay, or overturn results. So that's kind of the big picture of the deceive, disrupt, and deny strategy.
And of course, there's the first prong you were talking about, the deceive portion. There's the big lie, which is that basically Trump claims that he won the 2020 election when all the evidence is that Biden won that election. And then there's other claims about mail-in voting, voting machines being rigged, lies about non-citizens that you've mentioned. But a little bit of the federal action that Protect Democracy says is being used to fuel these lies in 2026. To start, we've got the FBI's January 2026 raid of an election office in Fulton County, Georgia, and the administration's demands for full unredacted voter rolls from 48 states and D.C. What are you watching for there? What do we need to know here?
Yeah, for the deceive strategy, right now it's disinformation being supercharged, right, from the White House. So I'll talk about it in the Wisconsin context. We'll start with the math problem in which this strategy is trying to inundate us with misinformation. So our elections as you know, are radically decentralized. In Wisconsin, 1,800 plus municipalities run their election. To steal a national election, you need accomplices everywhere. In 2020, when the ask came to clerks, to secretaries of state in Wisconsin, it's not a secretary of state. However, Republican legislators in leaders in Wisconsin courts, they all said no. So, you know, right now they are turbocharging the same lies that were already fed to in the past and trying to flood the zone with that information that then becomes sort of the predicate for their disruption. If we think about the Wisconsin misinformation recently, the president amplified a false claim that Wisconsin has more registered voters than eligible voters. Um, Except here's the trick. It conflates the state's 8.3 million name list, which deliberately keeps inactive records as a fraud prevention practice, so that official can spot if someone moved or became deceased. Um, with roughly the 3.7 million people actively registered, right? So it is basically continuing to spew disinformation and misinformation for the public that then justifies the action that they may take under the disrupt strategy.
You mentioned Wisconsin. Here, the FBI is also seeking interviews with Milwaukee election officials and staff who helped administer the 2020 election. How is that playing into the overall strategy?
I think that's exactly what the hope of the disrupt strategy, what they envision. So the goal then is to, if they were to seize ballots from 2020, the issue is, would they then take it and match it with their system that has been shown to be highly inaccurate, the SAVE system that wasn't designed to do this job? Let's start with that, right? And could there be pretexts to then remove people who are actual eligible voters, US born citizens, which we've seen actually in other states? And I can probably pull up the number in a little bit, but in Alabama, thousands of people were flagged. And then they said, oh, wow, actually, they are US citizens, and some of them are natural born citizens. And so these type of strategies, the disrupt strategy in terms of sort of FBI investigating these old ballots, fits exactly into that 3D play: deceive, disrupt, deny. I think it is telling right now that nothing has happened. There has been claims about election fraud in Wisconsin, specifically in Milwaukee in 2020. At this moment, nobody has been arrested, nobody has been charged.
This is Lake Effect. I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver speaking with Edgar Lynn of Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan anti authoritarian organization. You were talking a little bit about the SAVE system and how that ties into what the Trump administration is trying to do with interviews with Milwaukee election officials and trying to obtain ballots from Wisconsin from 2020. Can you just spell out and just define what all the elements are of in that approach there, what the SAVE system is, how what you think that Trump is trying to get at with these interviews, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the plan is to run the voter database into this error-prone, safe database to flag the suspect voters and to push ultimately for the states to remove them. And that's how an inaccurate match becomes an eligible citizen getting purged. SAVE was built to check immigration statuses for, like I said earlier, not for this purpose, but for benefits application. It was never ever designed to verify citizenship for voting, and I think nearly 1 in 5 queries can't produce a definitive answer. And what's even worse is DOJ has sent states draft agreements that would let the department handpick voters for removal with no criteria at all for who gets removed. No rules, no standards, no limits. It's just hard to imagine who gets picked and who doesn't. And so uh, we have done this. We know how this works, and I've just pulled up the number. Alabama flagged over 3,200 voters as non-citizens through that system, then admitted 2,074 of them were eligible, including a natural-born citizen who made a form error. Virginia's purge swept up a woman born in Brooklyn. Ohio referred 521 cases for prosecution, supposedly. Exactly one was legitimate. And so I just want to bring that out here in the sense that the SAVE system is not something that is truly designed for this and therefore yields a lot of inaccurate results. So once you take the voter data, plug it into the SAVE system, you can imagine when the errors come, those people will be challenged for eligibility to vote, right? In Wisconsin, at least, we have same-day registration. In states where there's not same-day registration, those voters could be permanently removed for this election, at least in Wisconsin, with same-day registration. If that was to happen, there is recourse for the voter.
And what can you tell us about the demands to seize state voter rolls and how the DOJ intends to use that voter roll data and share it with the Department of Homeland Security?
I think they're all working in concert at this point, right? The federal government is trying to create this unified system of all kinds of datas that they feed into it. So sharing data among the federal government agencies is happening, and that's already being executed as they continue to grab more data from wherever they can find. One area that they don't have is state voter data rolls, and this is why they've been so keen on trying to get this. As I was saying earlier, once you get the data roll, they will feed it into their system, and it's a black box. We don't know how the system works. What we do know are the results it yields, and we do know that they're inaccurate. And so people would be potentially removed, likely removed, I would say. And when that happens, it tilts the playing field on who are the eligible voters. If you're removed, let's say you're in Wisconsin, somehow your voter registration has been removed. Now, instead of going in line just to vote, now you have to get in line to go get registered, right? There might be a bottleneck effect, and when the line is long, somebody who's in the back of the line may say, "Hey, I've got other things to do. I got to go." And so it is a way to sort of directly impact voter engagement, to tilt the playing field to help their candidates.
And what do you think is the way that people can approach this now in 2026? Do you have any recommendations for people on how to deal with this that's, kind of in some ways out of their hands?
Yeah, I would say there are 3 things people can do, and I'm going to talk about simple things. The first one is get yourself ready. Double check your voter registration now. 2 minutes at myvote.wi.gov, right? Send that link to the 5 people they know, so that they can make sure that their registration is up to date. Know the election deadlines and make a plan to vote. Make a plan to vote early if that's the preferred method, in person or by mail, but make a plan to vote and vote early. If you are voting by mail, I would especially recommend that you vote early, given sort of the potential that's involved with USPS. Again, we have same-day registration as a backstop, so that's still an option. Second, become part of the system instead of just watching it. Sign up to be a poll worker with your municipal clerk. Wisconsin has lost a lot of clerks and a lot of election workers since 2020, right? The single most patriotic thing you can do this year is to help run the election and observe the process, the machine, the count, share what you see. Firsthand account is an antidote to conspiracy theories. And third and finally, be ready to show up. If officials come under pressure to break the law this fall, peaceful, visible public support is what keeps them from facing it alone. The deception strategy runs on confusion and despair. Every registered voter, every poll worker, every accurate conversation at a kitchen table is a direct counter to it. None of us needs to do everything. All of us can do something.
All right, Edgar Lin of Protect Democracy, thanks so much for speaking with us at WWM.
Thank you, Mayan. Appreciate it.
Edgar Lin manages state-level election protection work at Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan, anti-authoritarian nonprofit that aims to protect elections. He spoke with WUWM's Mayan Silver. Election integrity is one of the top issues we've been seeing come in through WUWM's voter survey. If you have a question about the upcoming elections, you can fill out that survey yourself at WUWM.com. Early in-person voting began this week for Wisconsin's August 11th primary election. On the ballot, races for Wisconsin governor, along with Congress and the state legislature. WUWM's online voter guide has the information you need before you head to the polls. Joining us to talk about it is editor and project leader Emily Files. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, can you tell us a bit about the primary election? What voters can expect to see on their ballots?
Sure. So it's a partisan primary where the candidates within the same party are competing against each other for the nomination for whatever office they're running for. So that means that you choose a political party that you want to vote in, and then you'll see the candidates in that party on your ballot. And you get to vote for your top choice. And whichever Democrat and Republican get the most votes, they'll advance to the November 3rd election and face off against each other.
All right, so I think most people know there's an election for governor, and there's a really crowded field of Democratic candidates right now. What else are people voting for?
Yeah, so there are actually primaries for both the Democratic and Republican gubernatorial candidates. There are 5 Democrats still in the race: David Crowley, Joel Brennan, Francesca Hong, Kelda Roys, and Mandela Barnes. Sarah Rodriguez and Missy Hughes dropped out of the race, though they were 2 other Democratic candidates. But you'll actually still see them on your ballot because they dropped out after the ballots were finalized. And then in the Republican primary, Tom Tiffany has a long shot challenge from another candidate, Andy Mansky.
How can the voter guide help people as they're figuring out who they want to vote for in this race?
So we sent a survey to all of the candidates, and we asked them about their state budget priorities and how they would address concerns about things like affordability and data centers. And their answers are in our voter guide, so you can take a look and see whose stance most aligns with what you want to see in our future governor.
So a lot of good context as you're heading into your polling place. Now, of course, that is far from the only race on the ballot. What else are people voting for?
For sure. So depending on your political party, there are also primaries for other statewide offices: lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and state treasurer. Our voter guide has information about what those offices actually do, and we ask the candidates about what they hope to accomplish if they're elected.
And then, of course, we have congressional races as well. What does the voter guide have to offer for those?
Yes, so depending on where you live, there might be a competitive primary for which candidate from each party gets on the ballot in your congressional district. And our voter guide has information for the districts in southeast Wisconsin, our coverage area. There are districts 1, 4, 5, and 6. And we ask the candidates in those races what federal funding they would work to secure for Wisconsin and what Trump administration policies they agree or disagree with. So again, you can find that in our voter guide.
Now, this is also a big election for the state legislature. Mm-hmm. What can people learn about those races?
This is really the biggest part of the voter guide, the part that takes the most work because it's the most races. So every 2 years, there's an election for Wisconsin's 99 assembly seats and half of its 33 Senate seats. And this is only the second election under more competitive maps where Democrats have more of a chance of getting control in the legislature after years of Republican control. So there are a lot of races in our coverage area of southeast Wisconsin, of course, especially for state assembly. I believe we had around 30 assembly races in our coverage. We have around 30 in our coverage area. So we're building voter guide posts for all of those. And you can find the information on the candidates, especially those with competitive primaries. We made sure to get that information out first. And even the candidates who don't have a primary who will be facing off in November, you can read ahead for that election. So we really do pride ourselves on being one of the only sources for down ballot races like these sometimes.
Oh, for sure. So to recap, our voter guide for the August 11th primary has information on races for governor and other statewide offices, U.S. Congress, and the state legislature.
Yes, and if you're not sure which candidates will be on your ballot, of course, everyone's voting in the governor's election for the same candidates, but some of these races like Congress and legislature depends on where you live. So you can go to myvote.wi.gov to look up exactly what will be on your ballot, which districts. And of course, because it's a partisan primary, the candidates will also depend on which party you choose to cast your ballot with. So you can actually click on the MyVote website. You can choose whichever party ballot you want to see.
Sure. Now, these voter guide posts are really driven by candidate surveys. What happens when a candidate doesn't respond?
Well, we call them and we email them and we keep calling them and emailing them. And if they still don't respond, we do a little bit of our own research and write up a summary of their priorities. And we share where to find information about them. But of course, we're always hoping that the majority of candidates will respond because that we really want voters to hear directly from them.
All right. Now, Emily, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, so we don't only want to hear from the candidates, we also want to hear from voters and from our community about what coverage would be most helpful to them leading up to the August and November elections. And the way to do that is by filling out our election survey. It's really easy, just a few questions. It's at wwm.com/election survey. And we've already been putting what we're hearing from people to use. It's informed what questions we're asking candidates and what stories we're working on.
Perfect. Emily, thank you so much for sharing all of this about WUWM's voter guide.
Thank you, and I want to thank the other WWM staff who contribute to the voter guide project. It's a big team effort.
It definitely is. You can find the voter guide at WUWM.com/voter guide. It also has information about how to vote in the upcoming August 11th primary. One way is through early in-person voting, which is available depending on where you live until August 9th. Emily Files is an editor and WUWM's Special Projects leader. Do you need some flexibility for when you listen? You can listen to Lake Effect on demand. Find it as a podcast wherever you like to listen, to download and enjoy on the go. In about 15 minutes, we'll learn what work happens at the FBI headquarters in Milwaukee. But first, we'll learn what goes into Coast Guard operations on Lake Michigan from the sector's new commander. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Captain Rihanna Macon is Lake Michigan's new Coast Guard commander. After more than 2 decades of service and at the brink of retirement, she says it's a job she just couldn't turn down. As sector commander, Macon is based in Milwaukee and in charge of operations in the 4 states surrounding Lake Michigan. Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. To learn more, Lake Effect's Excret Nunez speaks with Macon about what inspired her to join the Coast Guard and what her job entails.
I'm wondering what inspired you to join the U.S. Coast Guard and what role water has played in your life.
I grew up in Hawaii, born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. Growing up in a place like Hawaii, I think there's so many benefits. It's a magical place. And one of the reasons I think is the connection to the water. It's always been a theme for me, wanting to give back to nature and protecting that nature. And the other thing about Hawaii is our connectedness to the environment and how we view ourselves as a community and the responsibility we have not only to each other in the community, but also to the environment. So that was very important for me growing up. Initially, I was very drawn to marine biology, but ultimately, I kind of realized that maybe having a more broader approach to something like environmental science. So a bunch of different things happening, but one of the big catalysts was 9/11. And I very much felt a call to service. And I was very fortunate enough to meet a couple of junior officers who were assigned to a local Coast Guard unit. I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time. And they introduced me to the Coast Guard. I had seen some news stories of Coast Guard in Hawaii. There was a big case going on at the same time. So I just feel like the universe was colluding for me to join the Coast Guard. But what attracted me to the Coast Guard is we have a marine environmental response mission. So that was my initial draw, and the fact that I could give back to my country, be an active duty military member, but serve in the communities that you live in. And that was very attractive to me, and our mission of protecting people and protecting the environment. So that was what drew me to the Coast Guard. And at the time, the Coast Guard was going through a major reorganization based off of 9/11, and we had just become part of the Department of Homeland Security. And that opportunity provided me the ability to get into search and rescue, which really wasn't on my radar, but I fell in love with it. And it has become one of my primary roles. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do search and rescue and environmental response throughout my entire career. And it's all culminated with me coming to this position here based out of Milwaukee.
And on that note, prior to coming to Milwaukee, you were previously working for the U.S. Coast Guard in Hawaii.
Yes.
How did the opportunity to become the Coast Guard commander of Sector Lake Michigan come about, and why did you decide to take on the role?
One of the assignments I had was as an assignment officer, so basically placing people in jobs, and I learned about Sector Lake Michigan through that job and just heard overwhelmingly, thank you so much for this assignment. This is the best assignment I've had. It's a wonderful place to live. It has all of the things I'm looking for in terms of Coast Guard profession plus my family. So I was like, okay, I really need to keep that in my back pocket. But Great Lakes wasn't initially on my radar, but the opportunity came up and I did put it down because I was like, you know what? I know that people enjoy living and working on Lake Michigan. And my husband said, yeah, why not? And so we said yes, and that's how I ended up here in Milwaukee.
So now that you've been here almost a year now, and you're the new Coast Guard leader of the Lake Michigan sector, what does your role entail? Like, I can imagine you wear a lot of different hats.
Yes. So we generally say sector commander wears 5 hats. And those are based primarily on the authorities of the sector commander. So for search and rescue, SAR mission coordinator, so overseeing all of the Coast Guard search and rescue across Lake Michigan. And we don't do that alone. I always say search and rescue is a team effort, so we work very closely with all of our local and state partners. Another unique aspect of Lake Michigan is it covers 4 states. So again, just from, it's very vast, and fostering partnerships is very important. And when it comes to things like search and rescue, it's critical. Also, captain of the port, so kind of maintaining that maritime transportation system, ensuring that it's safe, that it's operational, that places like Milwaukee and the Port of Milwaukee can do all the very important and wonderful things that they do from a commerce perspective. And then I'm also on the facility security side, making sure that in addition to the safe operations, they're secure as well. And then Federal On-Scene Coordinator, which is the marine environmental response element that I was referring to earlier. So if there is an oil spill or a hazardous substance release on the maritime environment, that again, we're working with partners to ensure that it's being addressed. So we're responding to it, we're cleaning it up, but also we're preventing it from happening in the first place. So a lot of work, not just within the federal government, with other entities like the EPA, which we share that responsibility with on the inland side, but also with the state and local partners. So everything we do is really critical from a partnership perspective.
I'm Lake Effects ex-Garrett Nunez speaking with Captain Rhianna Macon about her new role as the Coast Guard commander of the Lake Michigan sector. So we kind of touched on this already, but having only worked with coastal and oceanic waters throughout your career, how has adjusting to the freshwater environment and weather challenged you?
From a search and rescue perspective, the tools that we use to conduct our planning. So we have some very sophisticated software that we use. So when we're searching for an object on the surface of the water, which is what our search and rescue is focused on, how do surface currents and wind affect that search object? And those factors are different here in the Great Lakes than on the coastal ocean or open ocean environment. And then how things, whether it is a person in the water or from a marine environmental response perspective, if we're looking at oil or a hazardous substance, how they're interacting with the marine environment is different from a freshwater perspective than a saltwater. So those are all things we need to take into consideration that I haven't had to do up until this point. And then obviously the most obvious thing I think is the wintertime and the fact that we have a lot of frozen or hard water and how that affects our operations. And so we have to switch gears. And so maybe from a very busy summer, we actually are the third busiest sector in the Coast Guard, which is pretty astounding when you think of places like San Francisco and Miami. And we're doing that all in 100 days, basically.
Wow.
So between Memorial Day and Labor Day, that is when everyone is out enjoying the weather, enjoying the water. So it's very intense, very intense. But it doesn't mean that search and rescue stops in the wintertime. It just changes. And so maybe we don't have that volume, but the complexity definitely increases. And so we actually train to do ice rescue, which is a much higher risk for our folks. In addition to everyone that's out, whether you're ice fishing or, you're going out and just, again, recreating, it's important that we are able to safely conduct search and rescue because it just doesn't stop. And so, wearing the appropriate gear, right, and also using different techniques in extreme cold environments. And one of the differences with ice rescue is you expect to fall into the water or get into the water. And so we have to be trained on how to anticipate and operate in that type of environment. Techniques on how you would recover a person in the water are very different. And then obviously time. Time's always a critical factor, but it becomes an even more critical factor with the extreme cold. So that's been a new experience for me, and it's been fascinating. Like, we have a training that we actually get all dressed out in our gear. We actually have to jump into, they cut a hole in the ice and you jump in the water. You have to know what it's like, and we train our crews to be able to work in those extreme environments.
So what was it like your first winter here in Wisconsin, like navigating navigating those frozen waterways?
So it was a great introduction. I got to go through the ice rescue course and then also understand what people do on the ice. Like, that's new to me, So ice fishing, learning about surfing. Sheboygan, Malibu of the Midwest. I didn't know that. But there's just so many different things that people are doing. I love that people don't let the elements stop them from getting out, but to do that safely. And then on the commerce end, right, so the ice breaking, working with our district, which is based out of Cleveland, Ohio, to facilitate ice breaking so that commercial vessels can continue to operate. So Green Bay, for example, we have icebreakers that ensure that we're working to get those vessels into the Port of Green Bay. When we say ice breaking, the icebreakers, the cutters, are actually going through and physically using the momentum of the ship to break the ice and keep a lane of transit open for a laker to get through or a tug and barge to get through. And it's very challenging because this is another thing I've learned so much about ice. Those lanes are hard to keep open for a significant period of time, long enough for a transit of one of these larger ships. And so that is a critical element. Again, we have different mechanisms to prioritize ports and cargo, but it is a challenge just because we are also working on building up our ice-breaking capability because we recognize that that's a very critical to ensuring that commerce is flowing all year round.
Well, now to move on to the summertime,
Yes.
since it's right around the corner, I want to ask you what our operation is going to look like. You mentioned earlier it's 100 days of busyness.
Yes, it is. It's very intense. I think this summer, what is adding a little bit more excitement is America's 250th birthday.
Right.
And so that adds another level, I think, to what we'll see. We anticipate a little bit extra people out on the water, especially for 4th of July. We're working, again, very closely with partners to ensure that we have what we need to anticipate what that extra might look like. We also focus on another big element is illegal charters. So not everyone owns a boat, and you have the opportunity to charter a boat, but there are laws and regulations in place for how you go about chartering a boat. Not everyone is really well versed in that. And so knowing whether or not the person you are chartering a boat from is doing it legally, we have found can contribute to unsafe conditions on the water. So we do have a campaign that we do throughout the course of the summer. It's primarily focused in the southern part of the lake, Chicago, and somewhat in Milwaukee, just because those are the largest populations. But making sure that people are operating legally and that the public understands what the difference is when you charter someone who is operating legally. So education and then holding people accountable if they are illegally offering these charters.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing all of this incredible information for our listeners. Thank you again for taking the time to share your work with me. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
Captain Rihanna Macon is the U.S. Coast Guard commander of Sector Lake Michigan. She spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez. You can hear a longer version of this conversation at WUWM.com. Did you know there's an FBI headquarters in Milwaukee? We'll learn about the work that goes on there next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, was founded in 1908. There was a Milwaukee office in operation about a decade later. The local FBI office moved from their downtown headquarters to a lakeside structure in St. Francis in 2016. The FBI has a wide range of cases they oversee, from terrorism to counterintelligence, public corruption and civil rights violations to healthcare fraud. To learn more about what actually goes on at the local headquarters, freelance reporter Stephen Potter spoke with several local FBI agents. He joins Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski to share what he learned.
So there's a lot to go into when it comes to the FBI here in Milwaukee, but let's start with their physical presence at least. Their local office is on Lake Drive in St. Francis, and I've run and biked past there many a times on the Oak Leaf Trail. So when did the FBI officially take this building over?
They outgrew their downtown office in about 2016 to move into this kind of huge structure right on the lake there. And it, used to be Stark Investments, so it used to be a big office firm, and it's just a huge space with about 80,000 square feet.
How many people approximately work there?
They wouldn't say exactly. There's a lot of things they wouldn't say exactly, but about 200 FBI agents, analysts, and other office workers are in and out of that space, as well as other law enforcement who partner with the local FBI come in and out of that space as well.
I know, it's probably difficult to get some information for this story, but what other fun facts about the building did you find out? Because it's hard to miss when you go past it, but it's also unassuming at the same time.
Yeah, it's a huge gray structure, and one of the first things you'll notice are these just huge fences, very dark metal fences, and a security checkpoint. So you get this vibe of it's not very welcoming, right? Like, don't turn in there and ask for directions. Just keep on moving. So the other things that they had to do to outfit this location, which, as I mentioned, was an office building, into an FBI headquarters, was they had to secure it. And one of the things that they did is they improved the windows from possible attack. So they put in 3-inch thick glass all the way around facing the street and also on the lakeside in case anybody in boats wanted to cause them harm. And another thing that they did is they structurally improved the building with huge steel beams, kind of a skeleton, all from the roof all the way down to the basement in case of a bomb attack. So those are just some of the things. They also built in places for detaining arrestees and things like that, interrogation areas.
The FBI, of course, has a wide range of things that they oversee, but can you explain to our listeners what generally falls under their purview?
Sure, it's a number of different things. There's a lot of overlap in the areas, but largely it's terrorism, counterintelligence, cybercrime is a big one here, public corruption and civil rights violations, as well as organized crime, and that can be everything from, old school mafia stuff to more current times, healthcare fraud and that kind of a thing. Also white collar crime and certainly violent crime.
And what's the threshold for cases that the FBI will take on? Because I imagine it needs to be worth their time, so to speak, in order to take it from a local jurisdiction.
Sure, it has to be a large case where there needs to be a lot of resources and a lot of person power to investigate. There may be large groups doing the crimes. The crimes likely cross state lines, so it gets that national effect. And it has to break some kind of a federal law. And you mentioned when the FBI takes over a case, one interesting part that I learned is that the FBI has to be invited in a lot of cases by the local law enforcement. They have to reach out to the FBI and say, hey, we would like your help on this. They can't just, like we see on TV, come in and take over the scene. That's just not how it works.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have assumed that was a pecking order, so to speak. What area of crime is the Milwaukee FBI prioritizing? You mentioned cybercrime is obviously a growing area, but did anything else stand out to you when you were speaking with your sources?
Yeah, they're really pushing now to make themselves available for instances of public corruption. And that's when people in power, either elected officials or appointed officials, someone who is, working on the tax dime, commits crimes, either bribery or extortion, those kind of situations. They definitely want to hear from people when those instances happen, and it's something that they are actively looking for because it really shakes the public's trust. Those kind of cases, when we work so hard to elect these individuals and then to have them turn around and commit crimes using taxpayer money to pad their own pocket, that's a problem that the FBI takes very seriously.
You spoke with several local agents for this piece to learn about what actually happens at this office. And typically it's not the guns out, super dramatic takedowns that we see portrayed in media, right?
Right, it's not. It's a lot of paperwork. They have to get all of their ducks in a row first, and then they usually work with local law enforcement. There are a number of liaisons, whether it's the Milwaukee County, Waukesha County Sheriff's Office, the City of Milwaukee Police. There's a lot of partnerships going on to build the case until they finally move on it. That can entail working also with city U.S. attorneys to build their cases, and they can do regular, on-the-street police work or behind the scenes undercover investigations. It really runs the gamut there of what they're capable of and what they'll do to start and finish a case.
Obviously, they oversee things happening in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin, but there are times when the FBI is working on something that crosses state borders, maybe nationwide. And one thing I want to bring up that you mentioned in your article was something called Operation Cross Country. Can you explain what that was?
Yeah, Operation Cross Country is an annual crackdown. It's a sting operation where different FBI offices around the country make a concerted effort on one day, one night of the year to swarm out and apprehend human traffickers who are engaging in crimes that involve kidnapping and coercing and threatening people, young men and women, sometimes minors, into prostitution and other illegal acts. And so they swarm an area. They make arrangements with these pimps to meet at a hotel or at a bus station or in a parking lot to have an exchange of sex for money, usually, and they swarm this person, they arrest them, and they arrest the trafficker, rather. How they treat what they call as victims is quite different and new, and it's not what we see on TV.
Yeah, there's an emphasis of helping them, giving resources, rehabilitation, so to speak, not treating them like criminals, right? A new shift.
Right. They do look at these people who are engaging in the actual acts of prostitution as victims, because most cases these people do not want to be doing this work. They're threatened, they're kidnapped, they're trafficked. And so the FBI comes in, they arrest the traffickers, the perpetrators of it, but then they try to give the victims services either for mental health help or for substance abuse, whatever it takes to get them to a position where they don't find themselves in that situation again.
Now, Milwaukee's FBI footprint hasn't always been super consistent here since the agency was founded in 1908. Can you share kind of when it started here, any significant gaps in people being operated and stationed out of Milwaukee? What's some of the local history?
So nobody knows for sure exactly when the Milwaukee office and the Wisconsin office kind of opened up, but it was certainly up and running by at least November of 1917. And then during the 1920s, a handful of FBI agents in this area spent most of their time investigating not too interesting cases such as bankruptcy, car theft, labor violations, and trying to root out members of the Communist Party. There was one instance where it drew a lot of then national attention where an FBI agent was killed. And that was a case involving Al Capone's gang, specifically John Dillinger, and specifically Babyface Nelson had a shootout with a young FBI agent back then named Carter Baum, and he ended up killing Agent Baum, and that was a very huge deal here, and it's still something that the local FBI hold very dear to their heart about how important their work is.
You spoke with the FBI's national historian for this piece, and I personally would have kept him on the phone all day asking questions. So was there anything you wanted to know in particular, whether it was for this piece or something you were curious about, and you're like, hey, I have a source to talk to?
Yeah, it was just about how the agency has changed and how they're viewed versus what actually goes on behind the scenes. So he mentioned that, the focus changes as crime changes, whether that's, nowadays we've got cybercrime and all of these virtual crimes and other things. But, back then, it was a lot of more mundane things like bankruptcy, investigating those instances and things like that. But then there was also, the mafia takedowns and such that we've had here in Milwaukee as well. But it's just how much crime has changed over time and how the FBI and the agency has reacted to that.
I'm wondering, what was your initial reaction to getting this article and trying to formulate kind of what you were going to write around it, given that they're not going to share everything with you, but we're also trying to show people, hey, this is actually what happens in this building that some people might pass every day.
Yeah, I had a very unique situation. I reached out to them and I said, hey, we want to look at maybe possibly an article on what you all do. And they invited me into something called the Citizens Academy, which is where they bring in people from, citizens to the FBI headquarters for about 7 weeks. And they show us kind of the view behind the curtain. We have different classes on what does white-collar crime, what does violent crime look like, what is cybercrime, and how do they tackle those things, and what's their end goal. And with a lot of law enforcement, their work is reactive. And the FBI is the same there, but they're also proactive. They want to not only take down the imminent threat, but they want to cut the roots of it too and try to stop others from just picking up where that other criminal left off. So they are proactive in that as well.
Stephen Potter is a freelance reporter with Milwaukee Magazine. He wrote an article called The Bureau, all about the local FBI office, and he spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski in 2024. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. An investigation is underway after a Madison police officer shot and killed a man. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll speak with one of the people overseeing the investigation. Thanks so much for joining us on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.